I think one of the, forgive me, one of the challenges of being the last speaker is trying to say something original. So I think I will focus on one aspect of it. I won't take too much time. I will focus on the aspect of social media and media more generally, because something that I've been studying for the last few years as a graduate student onwards has been the interface between technology and politics, particularly in South Asia, domestic politics, but which has invariably brought up the role of the British diaspora and the Hindu diaspora more generally in a number of ways. On social media, I think it's important to remember that a lot of statements we have heard from responsible people in the British state clearly indicate that they believe social media had a role to play. We've had the Chief Constable, Rob Nixon, tell the BBC and other media profiles that social media played a huge role in flaming the fires, in fanning the flames. He also claimed that social media was also what pushed people from outside Leicester to travel to the town. You know, again, speaking to the theme that Peggy was talking about, what motivates the outsider to come and join. We've had Mayor Sir Peter also lay the blame on unverified videos which were being shared on Twitter, on WhatsApp, and many other platforms. And one of the men who have thus far been accused and convicted, in a statement in the court, said that he had been influenced by social media to defend his community, right? So there are enough pieces of evidence pointing us in that direction. What sort of worries me in a lot of the reportage around the role of social media in the Leicester skirmishes is the fact it almost seems to suggest that there was something spontaneous in all of this happening. There is a suggestion that this was a peaceful community, and what has happened in social media was simply a benign tool which was present at the right moment in the wrong hands. And in the context of my own research, I simply want to suggest that I think we need to challenge this narrative of spontaneity, which either implicitly or explicitly often comes up. In my own research, which I have tried to do over the last few years, I've been studying election campaigns and political communication by political parties in India. I studied Congress, I studied the BJP, Aam Aadmi Party, and a number of other regional parties. And one of the things that I, of course, also study is not simply political parties, but also the larger right-wing Hindu nationalist ecosystem, which, of course, BJP plays a strong role in that, but there are many other outfits of the Sangh Parivar which have their own social media presence. And one of the things that I've tried to argue in my writing and in my research is the fact that it is not simply the case that right-wing political parties such as the BJP are using disinformation, and we need to be pointing that out. But an equal amount of effort is usually expended by political parties such as the BJP to hide the infrastructure through which it spreads. One of the things that I try to challenge is how left-wing versus right-wing political parties in India use media-based propaganda. And the trajectory that I narrate from the 1980s onwards till the present moment is the fact that one thing that has remained central to the BJP's propaganda is not simply the messages which are ever changing, which again tend to revolve on the question of beef, on the question of Muslim infiltrators, but also that it has historically paid a significant attention to conceal the footprints through which it spreads disinformation. So for instance, in the 1980s, when I've studied and spoken to Swayamsevaks who are using cassettes to spread messages during the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, they have very clear strategies on how they were covering their footsteps. When I come to the present moment and when I look at similar strategies are being followed in WhatsApp, again, an equal amount of effort is being shown to conceal the footprints within which a lot of this is disseminated. So I think as scholars, our job is not simply to point out that disinformation is being spread, which of course is a key point, but also to find ways in which we can lift the veil of concealment that parties such as the BJP often try to place in front of our eyes. Now, I want to suggest very clearly, I want to clarify quite categorically that I'm not saying in any way that a lot of what happened in Leicester was stage managed by political parties in India. That's not my point. But I think it would be slightly innocent on our parts to not understand the linkages which in the last few years have been established between the British diaspora in the UK and certain Hindu nationalist organizations back in India. The story, of course, is a long one. I could narrate from the advent of commercial internet services in the late 1980s and early 90s in India, where conglomeration of websites such as the Global Hindu Network, the Hindu Universe emerged, how gradually the Hindu nationalist organizations started translating the traditional shaka into e-shakas or Skype shakas. But I don't think we need to go that far back. I think there's evidence to suggest that there has been in the last few years, I would say in the last 5 years, a more concerted attempt to link the Hindu diaspora in the UK with what is happening back in the South Asian continent. For me, the clear piece of evidence came around 2019 because that was the year of two major elections. It was the 2019 Indian general elections, but it was also the untimely elections in the UK, where one saw this linkage between the Hindu diaspora or the South Asian diaspora more broadly in the UK show its affiliations and its linkages back home. Some of you might remember that in the lead up to the 2019 Indian general election campaign, there was a flash mob in support of Narendra Modi, which was organized in the streets of Manchester. Similarly, some of you might also remember that there were news stories around that time which said that second generation British Indians were planning on going back to India to help BJP in its election campaign. Now, of course, when I first read a lot of these articles, I think it was covered by The Guardian, also by The Diplomat. I thought this was sheer hyperbole. This is, perhaps planted stories, or perhaps it is part of the same narrative that tries to glorify rising India and hence inspiring, British Indians to go back and trace their roots. But of course, I did field work in the lead up to the 2019 Indian general election campaign in the months of March and April. And I was staggered to find personally that there were scores and scores of second generation British Indians who had gone back and had found places in the research departments, in the social media cells that had been created, both for the Congress as well as for the BJP. So there was a clear movement of ideas, human power, and financial resources. Equally, what I found stunning is later that year in December when there was the general election in the United Kingdom, we had, for instance, a leading member from the overseas friends of BJP in the UK say and claim that people from India and the diaspora in the UK had been rallied to canvass for the Tory party in 48 swing constituencies. Overseas friends of BJP member had clearly claimed that. We also saw there were reports in The Guardian that WhatsApp messages were spread within the Hindu diaspora in the UK, which were anti-Labour Party in their tone. So the issue being that certain Labour MPs had raised the question of Kashmir in Parliament, and hence there was a concerted effort with Hindu nationalist groups who were operating in the UK to ensure that people were not voting for the Labour Party in 2019, not least under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. So I think it raises the question that what is at stake in creating these linkages between second and third generation diaspora in the UK and what is happening with Hindu nationalist politics back home? And I think the answer is twofold. First of which is the politics of respectability that Hindu nationalists have always tried to chase. Some of you might remember that before Narendra Modi became Prime Minister, he had a travel ban in different parts of the world, also in the UK. And even before he became Prime Minister, there were concerted attempts in the UK, led both by MPs in the Labour Party and the Conservatives, so this is not simply a Tory party problem. In fact, I would say Labour Party MPs were slightly more vocal in ensuring that the travel ban that was imposed on Prime Minister Modi was revoked even before he officially became Prime Minister. In fact, there was a certain instance where a certain prominent Labour MP, I will not take the name here, but all of this is in public domain, went on the show of the popular TV news channel Left, Right and Centre, which is hosted by Nidhi Razdan, where he defended proudly Narendra Modi, and he also criticized the journalist for questioning and being too critical of the man. And I remember at that time, as I was studying how Hindu nationalists galvanized in the mainstream media, the most popular video that was being circulated at that time had a caption on YouTube. It was a YouTube video, and its title was "British MP slaps Indian journalist on the face, comes out in support of Prime Minister of Chief Minister Modi." He wasn't Prime Minister at that time. So it is this sort of respectability that I think Hindu nationalist organizations constantly chase, and hence there is something at stake there for them to forge linkages with British politics and the diaspora in general. There is, of course, also the concept of dhimmi and dhimmitude. By a show of hands, how many of you have come across this term, dhimmi or dhimmitude? Okay, there is one. It's spelled D-H-I-M-M-I. This is a term that was popularized by Giselle Littman in the early 80s. It had almost no popularity or uptake in the South Asian subcontinent. But recently, if you follow the right-wing social media enclaves, this is used across the board for people like me who perhaps have a Hindu surname but are critical of Hindu nationalist discourse. And this term dhimmi is basically used to designate all people who are non-Muslims, infidels in their terms, who live in so-called Islamic lands. And Giselle Littman really popularized this topic to denote people such as, who carry a Hindu name and are critical of Hindu nationalist politics, to show that there is simply appeasing Muslims. right? Quite like the trope that is often used against progressive Jewish people who are critical of, let's say, the state of Israel, that they're self-hating Jews. This is the same equivalent that has now been popularized in social media discourse. So this is another reason why what is happening at Leicester is so important for Hindu nationalist groups back in India, because they can point towards something like what happens in Leicester, and they can create all sorts of rumors about it to show that this is the threat of Islamic invasion that awaits countries such as India. BBC has had a report which has shown clearly that on a sample of 20,000 tweets that it collected around the Leicester skirmishes, half of them were geotagged and generated from India. And all of them had hashtags such as Hindu hate, anti-Hindu pogrom, and so on and so forth. The final point that I will end on is to say that this is simply not a problem of social media, and hence, when a lot of legal proceedings are now going on, they're trying to figure out who are the people who are spreading these fake news, fake videos, and conspiracy theories on social media. What is disturbing for me is that the right-wing mainstream media, and across the board 90% of our news channels these days in India, are right-wing and closely aligned and basically glorified mouthpieces of the BJP. Mainstream media has replicated uncritically this idea that there was an anti-Hindu pogrom in Leicester, that there were Islamic mobs, and they've used that sort of language to replicate that. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves is that the problem facing the diaspora community in the UK currently is not simply that there might still be fake videos which are being circulated, and hence those people need to be brought to account, which of course they do. But now mainstream media reports from really respectable news portals are also being shared in these WhatsApp groups, these Telegram groups. And it's very hard then for us to hold those people into account, saying that these are conspiracy theories which are then fanning the flames. The task has now shifted from simply rumor spreading through videos of unknown provenance to actual reports which are being generated by mainstream media journalists, such as The Print, such as India Today, such as The Republic. I think that for me is the real challenge going forward. I'll stop there.